knowing fear and sorrow. Fear. One will never say a snake, a fearful snake. Since a snake bites somebody in fear, one will never name it a fearful snake. Its fear arises only when it is confronted with some danger literally, else it is free. In the same way, a person who suddenly jumps out on seeing a snake can never be called a fearful person. Her or his body automatically reacts on seeing a snake, having the knowledge that its bite is dangerous. The body tries to protect itself. Babies who cry at night on suddenly hearing some noise are not afraid of that noise. The protective nature of that body reacts and wants to protect its ear and other organs, and also wants to protect its peace. So it reacts accordingly. This protective nature naturally exists in all the bodies beyond one's control. Hence, this protective nature of the body should not be identified or called as fear. This protective nature of the body, which is wrongly termed as fear, arises only when the body literally confronts a danger, and it is free when it is out of that dangerous situation. Protective nature of the body, which is wrongly termed as fear, may exist till the death of the body. There is nothing to be worried regarding this type of fear, and it is unnecessary for a person to create a self-image about her or him that they are fearful persons. On knowing well that this is not one's own personal form of fear, a wise person puts an end in trying to solve this issue in oneself, because it is not only natural but it is beyond the control of oneself. By not worrying and regarding these types of protective nature, which we name as fear, one automatically is not afraid of these types of fears. And when the fear ends with regard to fear, that is protective nature, then one is free from fear. Protective nature may arise at dangerous situations, but now one allows it to react in its own way and won't worry that one is afraid, because one knows the truth that it is the protective nature of the body that is in charge on a situation, and an individual has no place in identifying herself or himself with it and ascertain that it is my fear. Now, other than the literal confrontation of some danger, if a person assumes that any danger may occur, then that too is called as fear. This assumption, which is named as fear, should be resolved in oneself, else life will lack peace. To see the literal truth of this type of fear, shall we call it assumption rather than calling it fear? In trying to understand the truth of fear, shall we strip and see to exactly what fear is? The truth is, one assumes. This assumption is named as fear. If one is alone at night, one may assume that a ghost may come. She or he names this assumption as fear. If she or he names it as assumption, which is the actual truth, then one can see that the identification with fear fades away. Since one doesn't identify this particular feeling as fear, then that feeling is not fear anymore. Then she or he would say, I am assuming. They won't say, I am afraid, because fear means assuming. They are dealing with reality now. That's why they say, I am assuming. Hence, the feeling which was identified and called as fear is now being identified and called as assumption. If somebody is afraid of the future, one should say somebody is assuming about the future because that is the reality. In the same way, if one approaches all types of fears in the name of assumption, one would see a difference altogether in one's life. I am afraid that someone may insult me. I am assuming that someone may insult me. I am afraid how the society will look at me. I am assuming how the society will look at me. I am afraid that ghost may come. I am assuming that ghost may come. I am afraid that any danger may occur. I am assuming that any danger may occur. Likewise, one should start identifying. Assumptions will end by itself from a person if she or he sees clearly that it is mere assumption. Moreover, if one sees how assumptions occur, one would clearly see that it is merely a dream. And when one clearly sees that it is a dream, one would also be very clear that the experiencer of that dream is equally a dream entity. Now, summarizing the above discussed matters with regard to fear, we come to a stage that my body will react to dangerous situations due to its protective nature, and hence I will not say it is my fear. It is its protective nature. Let it have it. I am not afraid of that now, and I am not going to try to find a solution to stop it because it is naturally existing in every body for protection, and hence I let go of it. Next, the fear with regard to the future, insult, others' opinions, ghosts, fear of getting beaten up, and many such types of fears of the mind are not fears but assumptions. It should be called my assumptions, not my fears. And when the mind sees that it is assuming, which means when a person sees that she or he is assuming, and also evenly understand that assumption is a dream which carries the elusive and fictitious experiencer, the intensity of her or his assumption will start decreasing in a greater volume. Sorrow. If a bad event happens, one is put up with sorrow. One will suffer for a period of time depending upon that event. Now, there are events which put one in sorrow for a few minutes, and there are some which puts one in sorrow for a few days, and so on. Now, we shall take the sorrow which lasts for a few minutes. An unfair event has happened, and one puts up with sorrow. This sorrow is due to that event which took place. After a few minutes, one may suffer not to that event itself, but to the sorrow that one has experienced due to that event. Now, one may suffer on seeing one's suffering, and that sorrow continues for more minutes. Somebody said a wrong word about you. To that you are put up with sorrow at that immediate moment. You may suffer thinking that your image has gone and may find a way to repair it. Let's say you take 10 minutes thinking how to repair it or how to rationalize it to regain your image. After experiencing the agitation or suffering for a few minutes, from there on you may suffer not to that unfair event but unknowingly to the suffering that you have experienced due to that event. You become too sorrowful from there on by seeing that suddenly you have been put up with sorrow. You don't want sorrow to happen in you. And since suddenly sorrow has happened in you due to that wrong word or event, you couldn't tolerate that sorrow. On seeing that sorrow, you are unknowingly worrying more. Your further suffering from there on will be for the sorrow that has occurred in you. Now, you suffer not that event. You start suffering your sorrow unknowingly. First, that event was the object of your sorrow. And in a few minutes, the sorrow experienced due to that event in turn becomes the object for your further sorrow. That is, sorrow with regard to an event is gone. Now, sorrow with regard to sorrow is occurring. Sorrow with regard to some event is acceptable and also natural. But we human beings are caught in the net of an illusion which is called mind. Deciphering the reality is so essential for a healthy life. A mind is disturbed due to an insult or event. And since the mind got disturbed, it is disturbed more. And because it is disturbed more, one suffers more. And because one suffers more, one's mind is further disturbed and suffers. The suffering becomes the object, and that object which is suffering intensifies your suffering, and that intensified suffering again becomes the object, and so on. We at last say, I was in tremendous sorrow. In all these activities of the mind, it repeatedly thinks of that insult or unfair event and gives a reason that it is due to that word or event that I was put up with tremendous sorrow. But actually, if one perceives rightly, the disturbed reaction to that event or word has gone with that event instantly. Since you are disturbed at that instant, you couldn't tolerate that disturbance, and that intolerance multiplies itself and go on disturbs you, which we name as sorrow. This is the case in each and every type of sorrow, not only with regard to insult. Now, putting it precisely, if someone insults you and sorrow happens, suffer to that insult only, but don't suffer to the sorrow that has occurred in you. If you lose a job, precisely suffer to that only. If some expected thing didn't happen, precisely suffer to that only. Likewise, precisely suffer to that which you really confront with. Do not suffer your suffering. To see it more clearly, a human being who seems to be normal right now without confronting any sorrow doesn't seem to accept that she or he is not in sorrow. Actually, at present they are not confronting any sorrow. But why do they seem to be carrying a burden of sorrow inwardly? If one asks, how is life? They would reply, it's painful. Why this reply? Because they turn to their past sorrows, which they have experienced, and holding on to that, they are sorrowful now in the present. The present sorrow is due to the perception of the past sorrows. That means previous sorrows becomes the object for their present sorrow. Those previous sorrows may have some other reason. That's why they were sorrowful at that time. Now, their present sorrow's reason is their previous sorrows. Previous sorrows become the object of present sorrow. Sorrow has become the object, and the subject, who is an individual, puts up with sorrow, looking at the object which is also sorrow. This elusive cycle of sorrows has no end if one continues holding on with it. It is an evading illusion. When a stone is dropped into a silent pool, there occur many circles of ripples. The last circle of ripple is formed by its previous circle of ripple. That previous circle of ripple is formed by its previous, and so on. In the same way, we are trapping ourselves with sorrow upon sorrow due to the unawareness of it. One accumulates so many sorrows of the past being the previous day also, perceives it, and inwardly is in sorrow. Sorrow with regard to sorrow is ignorance and illusive. One who gets caught in this prison is never free. Sorrow with regard to an insult, a death, and to some outward situations of life is natural and acceptable. Those types of sorrows will end by itself when the situation changes. A wise person who thus perceives and understands the reality of sorrow, which a human being ignorantly carrying on in their mind, will automatically be released from that prison of sorrows instantly. Since a human being puts an end in making sorrow an object for their worry, there occurs a transformation, and one would feel a greater release. We have been taught by the society in understanding the causes of sorrow. Perhaps we all know the causes of sorrow, but one who doesn't know what is sorrow itself, even in her or his greater understanding of the causes of sorrow, will never ever get a release from sorrow. If one understands rightly, one will not worry any sorrow, either of the past or maybe of the futures, and will be free in the now. When one is all right in the now, when one is free in the now, then that is the real path for one to touch the bliss. Moreover, if one clearly sees how a sorrow occurs, one would clearly see that it happens by thoughts. And when one clearly sees that it is a thought, one would also clearly see that the experiencer of that thought is a fictitious dream entity, not the real you.